So good afternoon to everyone to the second lecture of the online distinguished lecture series on the topic EU's perceptions about India as a great power. Yesterday we heard Patrick Hugiel, who spoke and gave us a broad overview of the perceptions, misperceptions, India's engagement with the EU over a period of time, the rise of EU as a political actor. So all these issues were dealt with by Patrick. And today we have another very distinguished speaker, Stefania Benaglia, who also has done extensive research on India-EU relations for a really long period of time. And we are very happy to have her as part of this lecture series. Today, what Stefania is going to do is to dig a little deeper into India-EU relations, specifically focusing on economics and trade-related concerns, which has always been the sticking point between India and EU. Apart from that, she will also be dealing with specific countries with which India has had much broader relationships, and also, in addition, she will also be looking at some of the roadblocks and challenges as we move ahead in strengthening our relationship. But before I introduce you the speaker, let me first invite Dr. Nankishore to give his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanashree, and my special thanks to Stefania for having agreed to deliver this particular lecture. I think, as I mentioned yesterday, might be a bit repetitive, but nevertheless, it's very important to hear the other side of the story. In fact, in the whole power dynamics, this is exactly what we speak. We anticipate that the other side has to agree, or it has to confer the power status or anything that is associated with foreign policy. I think it's both of them going together makes the foreign policy the best, or whatever the outcomes that we are expecting, outputs and outcomes, both are assessed through certain tangible outcomes. Those tangible outcomes specifically are associated with economics. I think from that perspective, Stefania's area that she has chosen to speak on, the economics economic relations between India and EU is very, very important. Because there are a lot of sticky points, there are a lot of difficulties that are associated, and India still battles with the idea of, let's say, subsidies. India is still not very comfortable with certain WTO regulations. India comes up with its own social justice component, and it continues to be welfare state from a different perspective. India's social justice component expects it to still do a lot of handholding, which we don't see otherwise happening in places like Europe. But along with that one, there are also requests and there are also requirements in international forums as well as in foreign policy to deal with when one has to negotiate. One also has to see to it that both will have some sort of a win-win situation, and one is not treated as a junior partner. Though there are different type of standards that are already available, but yet this is very important front. I think there are many other problematic areas that would be put down if the economics of both the nations take the precedent or they take the center stage. I think that's the biggest advantage of globalization, of opening up and many other things. I think it's a very important area, and perhaps an area that is very, very pragmatic in its approach, because many others are loaded, many others come in time, and they can also be very, very politically motivated. But when it comes to economics, it's perhaps the lesser side of the story and pragmatic, and there are outputs, outcomes, and tangible things that can be assessed. So from that perspective, as I mentioned, this is a very crucial and a very important lecture to understand EU's perspective, because based on that, there are certain other modalities that could be worked between India-EU relations. So having said that, I'm very happy, Stefania, that you were able to be part of this one, and we certainly will think of establishing greater connections with your institution as well as you, and think of certain joint papers and other things that we can think and take forward the body of knowledge in terms of the India-EU relations. Let's talk about those things later. I think now I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Dhanashree to allow you to make the presentation for our students. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nankishore. So, in fact, Stefania is also very much linked with the India-EU think tank twinning initiative, something that has taken off well and has been doing well in terms of advancing at least research collaborations and partnerships between various EU think tanks and Indian think tanks and educational institutions as well. So having said that, let me introduce Stefania to this audience. She's an associate researcher at Center for European Policy Studies. She's also a senior expert in the public diplomacy project of the European Union delegation to India and associate fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali, and she consults for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Her research focuses on EU foreign and security policy with specialization on EU-India relations and more broadly on Asia. In 2019, she was nominated as a top 40 under 40 EU-India leader and international affairs, which is like a selection of 100 Italian women experts in STEM, economy, or international affairs. In between 2014 and 17, Stefania moved to Delhi. In fact, she was working on India-EU defense cooperation for IAI and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. In 2009, Stefania joined the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and then the European Commission, working for the Political and Security Committee team and then representing the EC at the Political Military Group. Previously, she worked and studied also in Israel at the International Institute of Counterterrorism, United States at the Italian Embassy and at SAIS and at San Francisco State University, at France, in France at Sciences Po Grenoble, and Spain, Leonardo da Vinci program. Stefania holds an MA in Strategic Studies from the School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS Johns Hopkins University, an MA in International Development from the University of Pavia, and a BA in International Relations from the University of Bologna. So there is no doubt about the fact that she's the best person to speak about EU-India relations in a much deeper way. And as mentioned, of course, questions are most welcome, especially if there are any questions related to defense related issues also, because she has worked on that as well. So that can be posed later on if there are questions. And I have had the fortune of also meeting Stefania once in a conference, the same conference where in fact I met Patrick for the first time as well. And we engaged in fruitful dialogue about India-EU relations. And in fact, the chapter that she wrote for that workshop outcome was published, and the chapter is called Global Trends to 2030, a European Perspective on Challenges and Choices for the EU-India Strategic Partnership. So I hope at least some of the students must have read it, and to know more about your findings and your views on India-EU relations. So now I would like to invite you to speak, and I think I will start the presentation from my side. Thank you, Stefania, once again for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's quite an exceptional occasion to be here and be able to share and discuss with a very interested audience. So I'm actually quite eager, and thank you again for this opportunity. Okay. So thank you for inviting me today. The presentation today will be divided in 3 parts. At the end of each part, we will have time for the Q&A, so that you can already have a sort of a dialogue and reaction on what has been said until now. The first part, of course, let's start with the trade and the business and the economic cooperation. So as you know, of course, the EU is the 3rd India's largest trading partner. And we have here a little bit of data, and we see that the first trading partner is China, the second one is the US. The EU is the 2nd largest destination of Indian exports. India, on the other side, is the 10th largest EU trading partner, so it counts for a much less actually volume of trade compared to what the EU represents for India. And we see that is actually, even if it is the 3rd, we see that the other 2 actually have a share of the market which are substantially bigger. Which are, of course, China, the US, and the UK, and then many others, going down all the way to the 10th place. However, the trade has increased in the last decade, but still the margin for improvement are actually quite big, especially if we look at the FDI. We see that the amount of FDI from the EU to India is about 76 billion euros, which can be significant. But if we look at the FDI from the EU to China, and I think the example of China is an important one. Brazil is 320 billion. So even if it is a feasible amount, is still compared to the other places and the other partners, we see that there is a huge difference. So this is actually, I think, what should be retained the most in all of these data. The fact that the trade relationship overall between the EU and India still has a lot to grow. Of course, there's about 6,000 European companies in India, and they provide a sizable amount of jobs. Indirectly, it's estimated for about 5 million jobs in a broad range of sectors. So again, the scope for improvement is there. We have already set up a precedent, but there is much more that can be done. Next slide, please. So the next slide. Here, we have simply some data and some representation of the trade in goods, and we see that, of course, 2020 was a bad year for a number of reasons that we all know, but the trend is in any way towards the positive. Next slide, we can say the same also for the services, which can be even more indicative. We have, again, here, simply the point that I want to make with these two slides is simply that the margin of opportunity is great out there. So then we get to the key juice of the issue, this pending FTA. Next slide, please, which is the number 5. The key objective of the EU in its trade relations is actually to have what the EU defines as a sound, transparent, open, non-discriminatory and predictable regulatory and business environment. And to just enable to unlock the whole potential of this two-way trade between the EU and India. And here, the reference that I made before with China is of course very important because, frankly speaking, what happens is that there is a real political realization from both sides, and especially from the European side at political level, that India should and could be a very important and fundamental market with whom to establish very solid economic relations. But it doesn't happen. That is the problem, of course. That is the challenge that we have, you know, beyond all of this political statement. We are now in a situation where you have the political realization of this, but there is the business that is not putting the words behind the political statement. And I think is because we need to get to this sense of trust in the market that can be brought about with these measures that the EU defines as sound, transparent, open, non-discriminatory, and predictable. Especially the predictability is, of course, very important for the business environment. So I think this is really a key definition, more for the meaning of it and for the, you know, what is not written, if you want. And that is really the direction where the EU wants to head. The EU wants to finally put the business community that has behind and put it, you know, put India a little bit higher in the overall trade relations that the EU has, because it knows that India, for a very long list of reasons, can really be a very good opportunity, not for the least for the, again, strategic value and opportunity of the strategic partnership. Next slide, please. The European Parliament Research Centre service, which is pretty much a think tank embedded in the European Parliament, did a study last year on the impact of the FTA. And pretty much, I mean, summing it up, here are the findings. It says that the gains from an FTA would be greater from the Indian side rather than from the European side, 0.03. The increase from the European side and 0.3 the increase from which of course, I mean, is quite a statement to say for, you know, the appetite, political appetite giving behind this FTA. But what is actually, I think, more important is the second finding of this report, which pretty much says, well, and this is a reading that I very much share, they have, of course, did an estimate of the cost, the amount of money that would be the benefit of this FTA. However, a qualitative assessment, not a quantitative, a qualitative assessment may well result in a much greater and broader and further reaching results and positive outcome of this FTA. This is, of course, because the political meaning behind an FTA between the EU and India is so big that it would overcome the even already great economic advantage of it. This, again, to say the FTA is kind of like an economic mean to reach a political goal, and even if the money behind is still favorable, the political gain that you would have overall would be so much greater that really gives the extra push to go in this direction. So where are we doing? Next slide, please, which is the number 7. Where are we with the trade negotiations? We know that last summit, which happened in May, the Indian leaders, the EU and Indian leaders, it was a leaders meeting. I guess you have already discussed the difference between leaders meeting and summit and how important that one was, but if not, happy to dwell into this. So last May, they agreed to resume the negotiation. This was officially held to the high-level dialogue on trade and investment, which was established actually during the previous summit, the one on 2020 in July 2020. They established this high-level dialogue, which is carrying out the negotiations. So they tasked this high-level dialogue. The negotiations actually have not officially started, so they agreed. As a matter of fact, nobody actually sat down with a piece of paper to agree on what to do next. So that is, of course, a little bit the frustration as well, if you want, but it is an important signal to see also how, you know, a little bit, if you want, we still need to put some meat and walk the talk. We're still very much on the statement level and much less on the, you know, actions. Of course, India is carrying out negotiation for an FTA in parallel tracks with the UK as well. As far as I know, actually, the negotiations with the UK are pretty much conducted at the same, you know, the progress is the same as from the EU side. So no concrete, you know, down to the detail, you know, the tough part has not been discussed yet. Next slide, please, number 8. So I would like to stop here for now because I expect also to have quite some questions on this part. Happy to answer any of those.
In the meantime, if you have questions, please, you know, you can post them to Stefania.
I see that there is Kiran that raised the hand.
Yes, Kiran. Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Thanks for that. I mean, we just started the lecture, but because you brought about the FTA topic, so my question was regarding the FTA itself. Like, because there is such strong momentum regarding the FTA, where do you think the agricultural cooperation will go? Because given EU and India's history, there have been numerous bans on Indian agricultural products. So do you think there would be any prospects for improving on the agricultural cooperation front?
Thank you. I will try to answer my best, but this is, of course, a crucial part of the FTA. And as far as I understand, there was an agreement on progress also on geographical, escaping my mind. I'm sorry, geographical determination, something like that, which is exactly on the realm of agriculture. So I expect this to be one of the tough discussions to take place, of course. As I said before, I see now the presentation, so good. I don't know how far there will be, and especially I don't know what will be the conclusion of this discussion, of course, which is obviously the most difficult difficult prediction. However, again, strong on my first reading and continue reading that this has a very heavy political, and actually it had it, but is having it more and more and more and increasing with the whole Indo-Pacific context. So this FTA is so much charged with a political value that I expect all parties to really push beyond the extra mile to make it happen, because it really has a fundamental importance for both.
Stefania, maybe you can go ahead with the next section.
Yeah, perfect. So the next session is actually looking a little bit of the difference between dealing with the EU versus dealing bilaterally with member states. And I know that this is really a key question, because often again and again, generally speaking, not only in the context of EU-India relations, but broadly in the context of, dealing with the EU itself, the question is, so why should I trouble to deal with the EU when I can have relatively good relations bilaterally with member states, especially on issues which are of my concern, and issues that are of my concern, well, we will see them. So my answer to this question is, it really depends on what do you want to discuss. Concretely speaking, if from the point of view of SME, Indian SME that wants to export something relatively neutral, like, a t-shirt. I want to sell my t-shirt in the European market. Do I have to go through the EU? No, most likely you can actually have a relatively good working business relation with member states bilaterally. You can find another business based in the EU with whom to have business and maybe a joint venture, and you can solve your issues bilaterally. It doesn't have to be, to go all the way to the EU. But it depends on what you're talking about. Again, structural issues are not going to be dealt bilaterally. We have seen already the FTA, when it's import duties, etc. This is all competence of the EU. And the issue of competence is a major issue of the EU. So going step by step, why dealing with the EU versus bilaterally? Well, first of all, there is a very huge perception coming from the frozen relation in the period between 2012 and 2016. I mean, not to go all the way to, too far ahead. Pretty much this period kind of like zeroed the relation institutionally between the EU and India. So this means that relations pretty much into brackets, they kind of started from 2016 to today, because that is recent dealing. And of course, this is an extremely slow amount of time to build up a constructive relation in all the issues that we're actually confronted with today. They will go more into this detail. The second issue is the issue of perception of competence. The EU is often seen as the relevant body for regulatory issues, but for nothing else. Well, starting from the fact that the EU, and I know as a fact because I've been studying it and working with it for all of my career, it's a very difficult entity to understand. So this difficulty certainly plays a big role in, dealing with, because by not grasping what are the competences of the European Parliament versus the national parliament, which in foreign policy are substantial, and what a national parliament says is entirely different than what a European Parliament says, and the function of the MEPs and the European parliaments and the national parliamentarians are substantially different. Understanding all of these things, even for insiders and even for members, from European citizens, is not straightforward. So of course, this difficulty has an impact. Impacts hugely, and I'm pretty sure that this was discussed at length yesterday. This is part of the problem. It's not the problem, but it certainly contributes to it. Now, another fact is also that the competencies of, European citizens are of course realizing that we need more of the EU rather than less of the EU. And so, as we have seen, and this is actually one strong point of my presentation today, is that we have had certain steps that have been taken until now. The COVID crisis was the one where the debt was put together with the Eurobonds, etc. And the Next Generation EU, you know, with the creation of that, the EU had a leap forward in economic terms. The next one is going to be the foreign policy. That is the last hurdle for complete integration. And we are actually galloping there at a speed which is quite astonishing for an EU observer, because we see the narrative of today being very different from the narrative of even 5 years ago when it comes to EU foreign and security policy. All of this to say, and I can, of course, I'm more than happy to answer questions on this, the EU is expanding its competence. So it's there's more and more and more role of the EU in everyday life of its own citizens. Again, business promotion will most likely remain at the hands of bilateral member states, but everything else will be, and is already, dealt at the EU level. This includes, of course, the trade issue, FTA, and all trade regulations, issues like climate change, which of course is a priority for all of us. Of course, you can always have implementing measures by member states that will, you know, do a program or finance some solar panel, but the governmental regulation, the discussion at highest level, will be dealt at the EU level. Foreign and security policy, I already mentioned briefly. Again, we are actually about to see an expansion of the role of the EU in the upcoming couple of years, which is going to be really substantial. So any discussion at that level will be, I expect, dealt at the EU level. And of course, connectivity, which is another, a kind of like not really a new tool, because the EU was funded on the concept of connectivity. I mean, the whole idea was exactly that, you know. I remember the Interrail when I was 18 years old. You finish high school and you go off on an Interrail, which is you have one train ticket and you travel throughout Europe, because that is the spirit of the EU. But they didn't understand it. It actually took China to understand that connectivity can be a foreign policy tool. So this is the transformation which is happening right now. Connectivity not as an internal tool as well, but especially as a foreign policy tool. So we will look at all these things a little bit later. Next slide, please. So on this part, I actually got a couple of sources from this paper from the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, and is quoted at the top, the Circles of EU-India Engagement, How Member States Cooperate with India on Global Issues, is one of the best recent studies where I've seen how EU and India relations actually are conducted and who thinks what vis-a-vis the other. So that is a source of some of information that you will see in the next slides. Some of their conclusions were that while EU member states, especially, let's say, all member states but France and Germany, which are categorized differently if you want on this, but the most member states prefer dealing through the EU with India rather than bilaterally, because they realize that the EU could actually be instrumental to achieving greater results, which are more coherent and they're more far-fetched than what they would be able to achieve bilaterally. In reverse terms, again, this is all about France and Germany, and we will perhaps look at it later. In reverse, India actually prefers dealing with the EU member states bilaterally rather than through the EU. I think this is changing very quickly. We are, perhaps yesterday, I understand you already discussed about the rise of the EU as a global actor, which is changing everything. And again, this is my point that I was referring to before. The EU as a global actor with a foreign and security policy will change the rule of the game. So governmentally, I think the EU, India is already understanding the EU better and dealing with the EU in a more structured way. There is still improvement to be done in this area, but I see a positive trend. As conclusion from that paper, they also give several factors of the reasoning for this, which is fostering cooperation on global issues, notably on China, and the engagement is primarily driven by business opportunities. And we know that, you know, for both economic relation and business opportunities are still the major driver of the relations. But again, as I said, this is, I think, missing out opportunities, bigger opportunities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this I actually was undecided if including it or not. I decided to include it because it says something, and I will explain why I was undecided for it. So the reason why I included it is that it shows that the countries that have the better and stronger bilateral relations are the ones that have the biggest political investment, which are, of course, without surprise, France and Germany. The reason why I was reluctant in including it is for the time frame that it takes. This is 14-19, so we are kind of like in the middle of the frozen period between the EU and India. So we see that the high-level visits from the EU institution is quite low, because indeed we can see that, you know, relations literally picked up 2020, 2021. We have seen a different speed of things to happen, and these 2 years are not included in the picture. And we also see that, for example, there's the group of other member states, and there we don't have Italy, which is another country that had frozen relation for a while, and now bilaterally, actually, in the last couple of years, they had a resumption of relationship that are very much embedded. Italy is part of this group of states that see the relations with India through the EU lenses, and that is again reinforcing the whole idea that most member states, but France and Germany, actually see the benefit of dealing with India through the EU rather than differently. Next slide, please. So going a little bit on the details on how some noteworthy bilateral relations are dealt. I took the 3 examples also because I understand these were the most interesting also for the audience. So France is certainly the most interesting example to have. France is considered, and most likely right so, one of the strongest strategic partner that India has. They have a very high intensive and very strong and effective political relations. We have seen in the slide before, you know, that France outnumber all other partners in terms of high-level visits. Actually, the previous slide was also in the period while the Rafale negotiations were taking place. So of course, very high-level visits very often. Yes, the foreign and especially the defense cooperation is a very important component of the French-Indo relations. They're mostly based on that. But this is, of course, very meaning for the broader strategic partnership that the EU and India has. Relations with Germany are much more based on business and economic cooperation. Again, the political investment is high also in this case, but is much more focused on this area. And now I also include the UK, which is, of course, as we all know, not a EU member anymore. And my first point is actually, what about the UK? You know, it's a very difficult country to read right now. Of course, what has happened and is leaving especially the Europeans with a very bitter taste, and there is very little appetite in pursuing for the time being strong ties and strong cooperation in foreign and security policy with the UK. I think it is very temporary, simply because it was such a hard breakup that it left this bitter taste, but this is not anything rational. So it doesn't make sense for neither of the two of them. So I don't expect this to continue. It is an unfortunate situation, though, that the UK doesn't have any, there was at the very beginning of relations during the negotiation on Brexit, the EU put out an offer for institutionalize the cooperation on foreign and security policy. But then initially the UK agreed, and then at some point halfway through the negotiation withdrew unilaterally without explanation, and that's where we have been until then. So there is no formal cooperation with the UK of any sorts when it comes to CFSP or CSDP, the Security and Defence Policy, which again is very much a pity because it sits in NATO, it has a lot of still, objectives are the same, shared values, etc., etc. Of course, Brexit is also posing many internal challenges that are diverging the attention of the UK right now, because of course, we have seen the situation of what is going on with Brexit, shortage of fuel and of food, which is really, the country that literally, supermarkets are empty shelves, and so there's no food around, and there is no fuel that is being circulated because pretty much the problem stems from the lack of trucks and truck driver, which were Europeans, and now Europeans are no longer admitted / they no longer want to work in the UK, and so now there's a critical shortage of drivers, and so there is no food and no fuel. So of course, with this context, it's actually quite hard to think about anything else. And actually, as last point, there's also a little bit of a question mark, actually a big question mark, on where the transatlantic relations themselves go for the UK. It's of course, if we compare what happened between, the disengagement in Afghanistan, so the relations between Biden and Johnson in the summer of 2021, and, all the way back to how Blair and Bush decided together to go to the war in Afghanistan, to initiate it. We are talking about two fundamentally different transatlantic relations. And I think that is also playing out. Of course, there's the AUKUS, AUKUS, I still don't, very awkward name, that has a play, but I actually don't even see that much of a role of the UK. This is very much of an Australia-US game with the UK in the middle, not really as an actor. So in all of this, how the EU-UK-India triangle, how does it play out? This is why the question mark. I honestly do not know. In theory, it should be towards the cooperation, but the fact that you don't have any consolidated channel of cooperation, then it's all up by the chance, and that is, of course, a missed opportunity. Next slide, please. Yes, I pose now for questions.
So one of the questions which was raised it earlier because I didn't see it. It's actually like TA on it a bit about the F. Yeah, sorry, can I just okay, can I just this question, which was actually about the previous section, but I couldn't ask it. One of the students actually wanted some more details about what is the way forward for the FTA. And what are the major, of course, you reflected on a few roadblocks, and maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that, and also what is the way forward for the FTA. This is from the previous section, and because I didn't see it in the comments, I'm just raising it now. Yeah.
Okay, so perhaps I take this one first.
Yes, you can take this, and then you can ask after that. Yeah. Okay, so what will happen with the negotiation practically is that they first need to sit down and discuss, because until now there has been only agreement in principle. There has not been a proper discussion. So this means, in practical terms, all the roadblocks that are there from the previous round of negotiation are still there. There has been an in principle agreement, but it doesn't really mean much. It means that only when the details will be put on the ground, we will know exactly, and we will assess the situation. So for now, unfortunately, is a very, I don't have too much of a positive
stance, meaning that the fact that nothing has happened from May until now is to me a little bit of a question mark. You know, why are we losing all this month if it is such a politically important file? And so I'm a little, you know, this is going to take years. It's not going to be a 6-month negotiation. That one is for sure. It's going to take years. I am hoping that there will be, I think at this point they will both push for a positive conclusion. So they will go on until they have an agreement rather than pulling out at some point because these are difficult negotiations. There will be difficult negotiations. I have pretty much no doubt about it. For both sides, there are some, you know, very fundamental. On one side, there is the European Parliament, which is growing. It's the FTAs are becoming more and more complex from the EU side, because from 2013, if we take 2013 as a date until today, the FTA evolved. And the FTA is a standard procedure, meaning that there is a template for the EU and all the different cases will have to be filled in. And this is the same dealing with India, dealing with Vietnam, dealing with Australia, another negotiation which is ongoing, of course. And we see that, you know, dealing with the UK, of course, these are all, you know, the template is the same. And I don't expect things to go any faster because you know, there are some files which are going to be difficult to be communicated. I think this is very much a communication issue rather than a content issue. I'm referring to the whole sustainability clause that is part of the FTA. In substance, this is nothing that India doesn't do already. In substance, this is something that India already does every day. So in substance, there is no change. But of course, the communication, something like the EU wants to impose whatever, of course, this sounds very bad. So the day when these clauses are communicated as imposition, they will not be accepted because no sovereign state will ever accept any imposition from any other sovereign state. So that is the communication that must not happen. Vice versa is the same, of course. The EU will not accept any clause that is imposed on the EU because no sovereign state accepts any imposition from other sovereign states. So that is where I think, because the communication from the European Parliament, of course, I made reference to it not for a reason, will have to be dealt carefully. And now I see that there are 2 other questions, so perhaps we can go on with those.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead with the questions. Akhil is, I think, the first person. Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am, and thank you for an informative lecture. So my question is regarding the bilateral investment treaty. So how do you see the potential of bilateral investment treaty as India terminated its investment treaty with 20 of the EU countries, and how do you see the trade-off between the mandatory arbitration of the international courts versus the state autonomy with respect to the taxation, and how does this manages the debate between the public interest and the business interest when this bilateral investment treaty comes into play?
Thanks. This is quite a technical question. Thank you for this. I would simply take, I wish I had more detail on this. My take would simply be that it will be all taken into the negotiation with the FTA, because of course that will be an over-encompassing negotiation. And within all of this major discussion, there will be the resolution on how to take forward broadly all the trade relations. But unfortunately, at this moment, I don't have any more details.
It's Vasu.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Vasu Sharma, second year student at the department. Ma'am, my question is based on the aspect of foreign policy and security policy. So when we are saying that France and Germany have certain perspective or perception of the whole Indo-Pacific, and when they have certain strategies on the Indo-Pacific, how do we see that the perception of these two countries affecting the perception of EU, the perception of EU of Indo-Pacific, and how does these countries' perception of India in Indo-Pacific affecting EU's overall perception of India in this particular region? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Yes, so we know that last 15 days ago, like the 16th of September, the EU released its Indo-Pacific strategy. So this means, and as you know, the foreign policy in the EU is by unanimity. Unanimity means that even, Czech Republic or, Luxembourg, if they say no to something, then the whole deal is out of the window. So this means that by publishing a document, the EU puts every single member states in agreement in every single word that has been stated in this document. This of course will leave a document which is different from what member states can write, because of course putting into agreement 60 million people is a different thing than putting into agreement 500 million people. And so, as you know very well, so the nature of the document is quite different. For me, this is a watershed moment, because this is when, and again, back to the point that I'm trying to strongly communicate today, the EU is putting itself out there as a foreign and security actor. The Indo-Pacific strategy is the last in chronological terms, but I think is the first really in this action of coming out as a global power in foreign policy and security policy. So yes, France is driving it for a number of reasons. Happy to dwell into the details. Germany is not opposed to it, and nor is anyone else. So all member states agree with the EU having a role in the Indo-Pacific. Strong cooperation with India, not only with India, but certainly India is seen and is stated in several instances, the centrality of India and the cooperation with India in this context. Of course, the strategic partnership waits in this context. So yeah, that's, again, we're just seeing the beginning of it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, if there are no hands raised, actually there are a few questions posted in the comments. I'll read them out. One of them is from Roja. She would like you to talk a little bit more about the impact of Brexit on India-EU relations, considering UK has been India's traditional trading partner in the European Union.
I think it is simply a blessing, not even that much in disguise. It's a blessing under the sun, because the UK for many aspects have been slowing down the foreign policy of the EU. Now, when it comes to actually certain blocks that were posed in 2013, negotiation were of course posed by the UK. Notably, there was the visa that was a no-go for the UK. I leave the discussion of India-UK FTA negotiations, because it is, I don't really have an insight on that. Again, I only know that it is not proceeding as much as it is proceeding the EU negotiation with India. But, now some of the hurdles that were actually posed by the UK are lifted, because the UK is no longer part of this negotiation. However, I also think that what we have today is a completely different global situation and economic situation from what we had in 2013. So by definition, the discussion will not be the same, because we are all different. So I think actually, if anything, Brexit was, and of course, India has to look at the EU differently. And frankly, if I have to say, it's also a little bit of an opportunity for India to change a little bit the narrative inside the European Parliament, for example, because the European Parliament was very much driven by a certain narrative that was given, especially by the UK members. And you see that the expertise of EU-India relation was very much in the hand of UK MEPs. Now that they are no longer in the game, now you have all of this expertise, which is kind of available because you have now other actors that need to come into play with a different narrative. Because of course, you know, the way Germany sees and German MEPs see relations with India is profoundly different from UK MEPs. No need to explain why. So I think this is actually quite a positive opportunity.
Okay, Stefania, maybe we can take more questions after your third round. There are a couple of more questions in the chat box, but we are like past the time, so maybe we can take them after you finish. Is that fine?
Absolutely. So we will go through the third part. So very briefly, this part is simply to provide a picture of where we stand today and simply to show how what I was saying at the beginning, you know, that for when it comes to EU-India relation, it's actually relatively short the time span that is relevant for today. And we have seen that every year the deliverables has actually been greater and greater and greater. If we take, you know, 16, we had an agenda, 18, we had the EU strategy for India, which is again another milestone. 19, we have, of course, break because there were elections in both on both sides. 2020, we have another important deliverable, the roadmap. And 2021, we had a summit, which is not a summit, is the leaders' meeting. And I have personally never seen a hype from a summit with any country, not only with India, any country. It really brought the foreign policy of the EU close to heart in the media. There was, of course, high expectations. There was a lot of curiosity. So again, I actually see a change in the gear and in the speed of political relations between the EU and India. Next slide, please. One of the main deliverables of the last summit was, of course, the connectivity partnership. This is the second one that the EU signs. The first one was with Japan in 2018. And actually this paved the way to the global gateway, which was approved just now with the State of the Union. It was announced. And the global gateway is the global connectivity concept of the EU. So it really paved the way for, you know, how the EU is going to implement connectivity as a foreign policy tool. Of course, the opportunities there are huge and immense. The 4 pillars are digital, transport, energy, and people to people. And of course, it's impossible to put priority in any of these areas because these are all fundamental. And with such a huge opportunities that they are self-explanatory. Next slide. Just a little bit on climate change, because of course that is perhaps one of the main challenges that the EU and India have. Now we're approaching the next COP, and of course trying to find if the EU and India manage to find a common way of, you know, approaching climate change. I think that would really be, of course, the game changer for all of us. So, of course, climate driven by domestic reasoning on everybody. You know, there's no, you know, there's a very politically driven domestic policy reasoning rather than, you know, working for the global good. But I'm confident that there will be some positive progress on this as well. Next slide, please. The areas where the opportunities are the greatest for me remain, as I said, the foreign and security cooperation because of the changing nature of the EU, again stressing it. The Indo-Pacific, of course, is the representation of this. We had the strategy which has been just approved. We have the EU which is now entering the region. We have to define also which kind of actor the EU will be in general terms, but specifically in the Indo-Pacific. I put the relation with Quad, which of course are now outside of the realm of the EU, but still there is a reflection here to be done, and perhaps not for today, but there is a reflection when it comes to, you know, what is the security representation of this foreign and security, because NATO after Afghanistan is, I think, well beyond any possibility of having a real intervention in the Indo-Pacific. I can explain why. NATO is the military alliance without NATO, then we need to have the EU with NATO out of the options. We need to have the EU, which is much more assertive. So of course, with this, we have a chain reaction of actions that need to take place in order for this to happen. Afghanistan, I highlighted as well. This has always been one area of potential cooperation between the EU and India. Both have very high stakes and interest in the country. Nothing concrete and up to the expectation materialized in the past. This is an opportunity to actually make it happen this time around. Next slide, please. And then simply to highlight what I think are two important appointments. First being the French presidency, which is about to happen from January to July, the rotating presidency of the Council. When you have the rotating presidency, you have a country that puts forward its own agenda. Of course, France, we know that it has a very important, the security component of the foreign policy is important for France, is like the most vocal member states on this. Of course, relations with India are very important. So I think the next semester will really be an important appointment for the bilateral relations. Under the French presidency, there will be the strategic compass, which is joint reflection that is ongoing, is about a year and a half, joint reflection on how the EU member states understand and define their DNA on their defense cooperation. The results will be presented under the French presidency, and of course it will be very important to see what is written in there. As one single point, I simply include the third country participation in the PESCO. PESCO being, of course, these projects of defense capability development inside the EU. And the question is, would India be willing and a potential good candidate to be part of these PESCO projects? I think, of course, it makes the case, especially for political reasons. And it would be, for now we have only Canada, US, and Norway, which are third countries participating in PESCO projects. So Canada, US, and Norway. I hope I said US and not UK. So reflection to be done. And another question mark that I point is that, of course, it would be very useful and welcomed for the EU if India would actually to publish a foreign policy strategy, a position, an understanding, a document that the EU could use as a baseline for its cooperation on foreign and security policy with India. Next slide, please. So I think that now we can take all the questions that are remaining.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Stefania. So we can, so if you have questions again, please raise your hand. But in the meantime, I'll just read out a couple of questions which are also there in the chat. Shishuraj would like to know, I think you a little bit you reflected on it in your last slide in particular. What is the potential role that EU can play in India's defense modernization and self-reliance effort?
Well, defense cooperation is, of course, an important part, and yeah, the PESCO would be a golden opportunity. This would be, of course, again, I mean, PESCO is more for now a symbolic engagement, so this would not, in concrete terms, change the game. But of course, the cooperation with this would start a chain reaction of positive developments in a vast amount of areas, which I think is a positive development and a welcome development to have.
Okay. So another question is about actually India-Germany relations and about India-Germany strategic relationship. And in fact, Gargi would like to know, I mean, first of all, her argument is that Germany is like a reluctant player when it comes to foreign policy and security policy of the EU as compared to, I guess, France and France in particular. So in that sense, what are the areas in which India and Germany in particular can enhance their strategic partnership?
Well, Germany has a different DNA than France, and this is also the beauty of the EU, is composed of 27 completely different DNAs. And all of them come with their strong added value. When it comes to bilateral relations, for me, the perspective that where the EU, I will see it is having ever stronger EU, especially when it comes to foreign and security, because there is no future for individual member states. So again, business opportunities can be undertaken at bilateral level. Everything which is broader than bilateral business opportunities, I think, should be taken at the EU level, also because they simply have a different impact and different breadth, and it has a different structural approach.
Do you have any specific areas in which India and Germany can? That is also one of our questions. What are the areas in which India and Germany in particular can enhance their relationship?
I don't have any example at hand, also because I don't necessarily see bilateral relations versus EU relations with the EU. To me, I would be the same answer for all other member states. I mean, when you have specificities with bilateral member states, this is something very specific for the country. For example, Sweden, I know that they have innovation strategic partnership. So these are very ad hoc and specific partnerships. When it comes to Germany, I cannot provide more details than this.
Okay, yeah. Kiran, go ahead.
Hi, ma'am. So I have two specific questions. One is regarding the BTIA, that is the Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement. So it was started long back in 2006, but we are not able to realize it. So what are some of the major roadblocks? The second one is one of the major areas of concern for both EU and India. Our area of contestation is the issue of IPR. So can you comment on it? Like, what are the areas where we can converge on the issue of IPR? Thank you.
Thanks. I guess that I would collect both answer with, again, negotiation under the FTA. This will be the answer to all of these questions, including the IPR, because of course that is an important component in that as well. So all of these issues will be solved. It's hard for me to do a prediction at this point because negotiation haven't started yet, so we don't know. We are still at the point of, a year ago was exactly the same for this matter.
Yeah, okay, but what are the kind of views that exist within the EU as far as IPR related concerns are there, especially because even when this whole issue of vaccination came up, and there were a lot of concerns, especially in Germany, who actually raised issues about IPR and why it should not be like a free hand for everyone to produce these vaccines.
I don't have an insider point of view. I only have a consumer view on that, which is a complete, I would like to dissociate, because as a consumer, I would tend to answer in one way, but as a researcher, I understand that there are valid points for both sides, of course. But I don't have, as a researcher, I guess we all can only trust our answer only if we have enough data, we know enough data to provide a sensitive answer, and not, anecdotal or consumer-based. This would be my answer in this case, so I don't feel confident in giving it, because it would not be a researcher kind of answer.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well taken. Now, Malvika, you want to ask your question?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Sorry. So I wanted to ask about the role of soft power in the strategic relationship between India and the EU.
Yes, can I ask you what exactly would you like to know? Because that's indeed a lot to talk about it.
A little bit of focus on the economic and diplomatic part of it.
Okay, so you mean how do you think the EU should leverage its economic power with India, or vice versa? Or how do you think India should leverage its economic power with the EU? What are you more interested?
both perspectives, but I would like more of a EU towards India first.
Okay, so you kind of like nail it, because indeed the EU doesn't really know how to leverage its economic power for sure. Its normative power second together with economic power, and second or third its soft power, because its soft power is also something that the EU is very much understanding that it has and doesn't really understand how to strategically use it. This falls into the broader view of, how the EU understands itself as a foreign policy actor. I think we are in the making for this. We're not really close to understanding, we've not done our job yet, meaning that the awareness that these are important elements of your foreign policy is growing. Honestly, the EU hasn't really seen itself, and in most parts of the House, some can still make the case that the EU is not a EU foreign policy. And if you don't see yourself as a foreign policy actor, by definition, you don't leverage on your economic power, you don't leverage on your normative power, and certainly don't leverage on your soft power. So again, this is kind of like a growing awareness that is happening. Public diplomacy is we are now at the second generation of public diplomacy projects that is under discussion. As you know, there is the multi-annual financial framework, which is the 7 years major budget discussion that are, they set the pace for every expenses of the EU for the following 7 years. The last MFF, so the one that officially finished in 2020, was the one establishing the project on public diplomacy. This second one, officially starting in 2021, but of course negotiations are still in the making, is the one establishing the second generation of public diplomacy, but we don't have anything out yet because they're still discussing it. We are getting there, we're not there yet. Also because here you transfer the whole, from member states to the EU level, all of these issues, which of course, foreign and again, security policy are by definition sovereign. Countries are very attached to it. So they have a very hard time. It's much easier to give away your money than to give away your foreign policy. So this is a little bit the mentality change that is happening. Again, it's happening relatively fast, but there's still some work to do.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Stefania. We are well past time, actually. I don't see any other hands raised, but if there are any more questions, you can write to Stefania at a later point in time. And if you need more material on any of these issues that she discussed, all of them are there in the slides also. So you can get an idea of various aspects that she discussed, especially about the FTA and all those details in particular. So I would like to now officially and formally deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you so much, Stefania, for agreeing to deliver this lecture. There were a few technical glitches in between, but I'm glad it worked out somehow, like we could work it out, and the students also were able to ask you questions and get answers from you. And of course, if there are more clarifications or anything, as I mentioned, more than welcome to write to her at a later point in time. So thank you so much, Stefania, for agreeing to deliver this lecture and spending this much time with our department virtually. And hopefully, as the situation improves, you can visit India and visit Manipal and our department in the future. I would also like to thank the head of the department, Dr. Nandkishore, for helping us coordinate the session. As I mentioned, this is also part of the different courses. EU is part of various modules that we teach in the program, and hence it is very important to also understand the European Union's perspective on various issues and not just discuss about Indian perspective on some of these issues. So hence it was very important to also hear from you and Patrick as to how the EU has evolved its positions and policies towards India over a period of time. So thank you so much for elaborating on all these issues. I would also like to thank the students and other members of the audience who were active and asked questions to Stefania, and thank you, Stefania, for also patiently answering them. So thank you so much, and hope to see you soon, Stefania.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure, and indeed, I hope to see you, all of you, soon. Thanks again. It was a very enriching experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.